Is movie legend Charles Bronson back in From Hell to the Wild West? Well, not really, but you may be forgiven for thinking so. We are talking about the low-budget horror action western movie From Hell to the Wild West, directed by Renny Perez, who is the man behind the Playing with Dolls trilogy. And basically it focuses on a story. It involves Jack the Ripper, or apparently it could be Jack the Ripper, as he has travelled from London to the Wild West, and he is pursued by a gunman who looks very much like the aforementioned Charles Bronson. A hell of a lot like it, almost as if it was by design, you might say. And yeah, he's being pursued by, we'll just call him Charles Bronson lookalike, and another kind of lawman, and he essentially is carrying on his murderous spree, wanting to slice up prostitutes and attracts women to this kind of like this abandoned western town with a kind of the promise of work, and then decides to kill them once they're there. And it really focuses on the character Hannah, played by Alana Forte, who is a servant girl who comes to this kind of woman, and she is really our main character, to be quite honest. And she's obviously kind of trying to get away from the killer and such. So what do we think of From Hell to the Wild West? A bizarre film, let's just say that. A very bizarre film. Renny Perez's movies, from what I've seen so far, have been a little weird. Let's talk about the good stuff first of all. First of all, Renny Perez obviously works as a cinematographer, and therefore his films have fantastic cinematography, despite the fact they're obviously quite low budget. So these are very well shot films. There's some great angles here, and some really kind of like stunning shots of kind of obviously the scenery. There's some great kind of like artistic shots of kind of like you know, action shots, people running slow-mo, stuff like that. So he really does have an eye for some details here. So it's actually quite a good looking film in some degrees. I think the mask of the killer looks great. It kind of reminds me of a kind of a Clive Barker style mask here. So it's not your traditional kind of like Jack the Ripper garb, so to speak. So he looks kind of cool, although we'll come on to some issues I have with him in just a minute. And there are some kind of like some quite interesting kills, shall we say, and it does get rather bloody. The guy who plays Charles Bronson really does kind of obviously look the part, and it's almost weird seeing obviously a modern film with such a kind of a close look like. It almost makes me wonder why people don't do this more often. In a way, it's quite a clever kind of marketing tool, to be quite honest with you. So the film kind of has some visual style, and I would say Alana Forte is quite a good leading woman here. She's probably the best actor in this cast, giving, you know, quite a both a sexy, sultry, and a kind of a brave role of this kind of like this slave girl who manages to get free and ends up being the protagonist to a certain degree. But where does it go wrong? Well, let's talk about the bad stuff first of all. The rest of the acting is a little questionable, shall we say. The actual killer himself, who doesn't really say much, has some of the worst visual acting I'll ever see. I mean, he's got this, he's behind this mask, but you can really see him overacting with the eyes and stuff like that, and you know, just being very kind of like OTT with a kind of like his kind of like visual acting and the way he's holding the knife and stuff like that. It's just over the top and kind of borders on parody and kind of cheesiness, to be honest with you, despite the fact that he really doesn't say much. But they kind of, to plus that, the kind of audio in this movie is really weird. So they really overemphasize certain sound effects. We have like when people are getting stabbed, you hear all this like real big loud sort of squelching and kind of like, you know, guts being ripped out to like really loudly, but then people will talk and it will kind of won't be as loud and stuff like that. And the really overemphasized kind of demonic voice that this kind of killer is hearing, again, it's just a little bit over the top. So some of the audio here is very questionable, and the kind of the score as well. There's kind of like one kind of like musical riff that it kind of goes through again and just becomes a little bit grating. But then we'll have just like lots of silence for a while. It's kind of, I don't know, the audio just seems weird. Now, in regards to the kind of, going back to the kind of the visual stuff for a little bit, although I like some of the kind of the cinematography, particularly when we were kind of out in the woods, this was actually quite similar to Playing with Dolls, because they had some fantastic external shots here. When we were in this town, we're in this kind of Old West town, it looks like it's a kind of a theme park Old West town almost, with really unconvincing spider webs and things like that, and I don't know, it just doesn't seem like an actual, it seems like a tourist attraction, like thing like what your kids would go to basically, rather than a, you know, a set or anything like that. So I've mixed in some of the kind of the visual stuff here. When we come to the actual story, this is where it gets really bizarre, because you essentially have unconnected characters. So we have the story where this killer and he's attracting these kind of women and, you know, killing them, and our main kind of character, like I say, is Hannah, played by Alana Forte, and her kind of like her mistress, I suppose, this other woman. And they probably have the most amount of dialogue on the screen, although they're not really in it for the first kind of like quarter of the movie, to be quite honest. And so you have a couple of other women as well who kind of turn up at the beginning. And then we have the Charles Bronson lookalike character, who's almost on a completely different story. He's chasing the killer, but he doesn't really ever seem to have anything to do with him. They never really sort of, they always seem one step behind, and they have their own sort of stuff going on with this kind of like band of varmints that are on their tail and stuff like that. And then we also have like a third sort of story with this kind of, in the present time, this professor and his student kind of looking at books and thinking, oh yes, we've discovered the real story behind Jack the Ripper. That seems like reshoots to me, and then just kind of, you know, to try to plus up the running time maybe. But because of that, you never really feel like there's a central character to this story. It almost seems like it's just a load of garbled scenes that are kind of thrown together. So the story is really kind of like misplaced. And I had some problems with the Playing with Doll films, because again, there's just some odd choices in regards to the story there. So although I think Rene Perez has definitely some talent in regards to some visual styles here, I mainly feel his storytelling is at a weaker side here, and coupled that with some kind of like some subpar acting, some kind of like overproduced audio effects and stuff, and just a kind of a little bit of a fake feel, particularly we're in the kind of this town. It doesn't make for a particularly compelling story. But like I said, it is visually kind of quite beautiful to look at, in both the cinematography and Alana Forte and her, you know, sexiness and all that. There are plenty of other sexy women, and there will be boobage in there as well for people who like that kind of thing. But yeah, it's kind of a bit of a weird story, to be honest. I mean, it's kind of cool to see this guy who looks like Charles Bronson, who, I've got to be honest, struggles a little bit with the acting, but it's still kind of fun, but he just wasn't really anything to do with the story, to be honest. I was expecting him to have a far more integral role into the story, and he almost seemed like a bit of an afterthought. So don't be kind of expecting too much. And they're kind of like this lawman that he's kind of teamed up with, they're just like, that seems terrible. So overall, I've got to say, I'll give this movie a 4 out of 10. It definitely has some good elements in it, and it's worth watching for some good parts, but as a whole, I've got to say the story really does sort of fall down, and yeah, bit of a bizarre one. So I'll give it a 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.